Have you ever just stopped and really thought about what makes you, you? It's got to be one of the biggest questions out there. So that's what we're going to do right now. We're going to break down the psychology of who we are by looking at the key ideas that build our inner and outer worlds. Yeah, let's just dive right in with that. Who are you? Seems simple, right? But the answer is this incredibly complex and beautiful thing woven together from our thoughts, the stories we tell, and our everyday actions. Let's start pulling at some of those threads. Okay, so here's our game plan for tackling that huge question. We're going to look at it through three different but totally connected lenses. First, we'll explore that private inner world of the self. Then we'll look at the public story we tell, our identity. After that, we'll get into the consistent patterns of our personality. And finally, we'll see how it's all part of one big, lifelong journey. All right, first up, this self. I want you to think of this as your internal blueprint. It's that super personal, totally private understanding you have of who you are, when nobody else is looking. So what the experts call self-understanding is basically the stuff you're made of, in your own mind. It's all the different roles and labels you use to define yourself. Maybe you're a student, a brother, a huge fan of a certain band, a gamer. It's the answer you give when you ask yourself, who am I? And this idea of who we are isn't something we're just born with. It changes a lot. As babies, we start with the most basic thing, recognizing ourselves in a mirror. As little kids, it's all about concrete stuff, like I have brown hair or I can run really fast. But then adolescence hits and suddenly it's about these big abstract ideas like I'm a sensitive person or I'm so indecisive. And as adults, we often do this life review where we look back and kind of reinterpret our own story. Now, inside this inner world, there are two words that get thrown around and mixed up all the time, self-esteem and self-concept. Here's the simple difference. Self-esteem is the big picture. It's your overall feeling of self-worth. Self-concept, though, is much more specific. It's how you feel about yourself in certain areas of your life. Let's make this super clear with some examples, because it really helps. A statement of self-esteem is broad, like I am a good person. A statement of self-concept is specific, like I am really good at math. See the difference? You could have a great self-concept as an athlete, but maybe a not-so-great one as a public speaker. All those little specific parts feed into your overall self-esteem. So check this out. Researchers have actually mapped how our self-esteem tends to change over our lives. It's usually pretty high when we're kids, but then it takes a major nosedive during adolescence. After that, it climbs back up through our adult years and then tends to dip again later in life. And that dip in the teenage years, yeah, I think a lot of us can remember feeling that one, right? So if the self is our private blueprint, how do we show that to the outside world? Well, that brings us to our next big idea, identity. If the self is the blueprint, identity is the finished self-portrait that you hang up for everyone else to see. It's your public story. And wow, this story is made up of so many different parts, isn't it? Your identity is your career, your politics, your spiritual side, your relationships, where you come from, the things you accomplished, what you love to do for fun. It's the whole shebang. All these pieces come together to form who you are. You can't really talk about identity without talking about the psychologist Erik Erikson. He had this huge idea that adolescence is the most critical time for this. He called it the stage of identity versus identity confusion. This is when we're faced with those giant questions. Who am I? What am I all about? And where in the world am I going? And Erikson knew this was tough. So he came up with this idea he called the psychosocial moratorium. It sounds complicated, but it's actually a pretty cool concept. It's basically a timeout. It's this gap between being a kid and being a full-on adult, where society kind of gives you a pass to experiment, to try on different hats and see what fits without massive consequences. Okay, so another researcher, James Marcia, took Erikson's ideas and ran with them. He said it really boils down to two key questions. Have you explored your options and have you committed to anything? If your answer is no to both, you're in what he calls identity diffusion. If you've committed without really exploring, like you just adopt your parents' beliefs, that's identity foreclosure. If you're out there exploring like crazy but haven't landed on anything yet, that's identity moratorium. And finally, if you've done the work, explored the options, and made a choice you feel good about, you've reached identity achievement. But here's the kicker. This isn't some test you take once and you're done. A lot of us go through what are called mama cycles. That means you move from moratorium, that searching phase, to achievement, and then later in life, something might happen that sends you right back into moratorium to search again before reaching a new achievement. Identity is always a work in progress. So, if identity is your story, what's it written with? What gives it its flavor and style? Well, that brings us to our third piece of the puzzle, personality. Think of personality as the consistent, lasting patterns in the way you think, feel, and behave that color every single part of your story. And these days, when psychologists talk about personality, they almost always come back to one major model, the Big Five. And lucky for us, there's a handy acronym to remember it, OCEAN. That stands for openness to experience, conscientiousness, extroversion, agreeableness, and neuroticism. You can think of these as the 5 main sliders that get adjusted to make each of us so unique. So you might be thinking, okay, interesting, but so what? Well, this stuff has huge real-world consequences, even for your health. There's tons of research showing that certain traits are linked to how long we live. For example, being high in conscientiousness, being organized, disciplined, reliable, is one of the strongest predictors of a longer, healthier life. It just goes to show these aren't just labels.
Okay, let's bring it all home. How do these 3 big ideas, our inner self, our public identity, and our unique personality, all work together and evolve throughout our entire lives?
So while we're always changing, there's this idea called the cumulative personality model. And it basically says that as we get older, our personality tends to get more stable. And why is that? Well, it seems we just get better at picking and shaping our lives, our jobs, our friends, our hobbies to fit who we are. And that in turn just makes us more us.
And there's a really brilliant strategy for how we adapt as we get older. It's called selective optimization with compensation. The story of the legendary pianist Arthur Rubinstein is the perfect example. As his fingers got slower with age, he first selected a smaller number of pieces to play. Then, he optimized his skill by practicing those fewer pieces way more often. And for the really cool part, compensation, he would slow down just before a really fast part, which made the fast part sound even faster to the audience. It's an absolute masterclass in adapting successfully. Ultimately, this whole process, getting to know our inner self, building our identity, expressing our personality, it's all about one thing, growth. It's like D.H. Lawrence wrote, the living self has one purpose only, to come into its own fullness of being. And that brings us right back to where we started, but now, hopefully, with a whole new way of looking at it. The journey to figure out who you are isn't about finding some final static answer. It's a living, breathing process. Yourself, your identity, your personality, they're all parts of a story that you are actively writing right now. So the only real question left is, who will you become?